Block 1. The scent of pine and frost clung to the air as I slipped through the forest, my footsteps barely audible against the cushion of fallen leaves. 10 years of silence had taught me to move like a ghost, to exist without leaving traces. 10 years of pretending to be mute had trained me to communicate without sound, to express without exposing the one thing that could destroy everything I'd built, my voice. Winter was settling over the Packlands, and with it came the claiming ceremony preparations. The great hall buzzed with activity as I entered through the servants' entrance, my head bowed as always. No one paid attention to the mute girl with pale blonde hair who cleaned the floors and served the meals. I was invisible by design, forgettable by necessity. "Arya, there you are." Hannah, the head kitchen maid, gestured frantically toward a stack of plates. "The Alpha delegations arrived tonight." "Everything must be perfect," I nodded, reaching for my worn apron hanging on the wooden peg by the door. My grandmother's silver pendant swung from my neck as I bent forward, the only possession I'd managed to keep when I fled my home pack a decade ago. The crescent moon etched into its surface had nearly worn smooth from my nervous habit of rubbing it between my fingers when anxiety threatened to overwhelm me. Grandmother had pressed it into my palm the night she died, whispering, "Your voice is your power, little one. Guard it well." If only she could see me now. The kitchen was chaos, wolves in human form rushing to prepare for the most significant event of the year. The claiming ceremony brought together unmated wolves from all packs, but this year was special. This year, the Alpha King himself would be present, searching for his mate after years of solitude following the death of his intended bride. I kept my eyes down as I arranged delicate china plates in precise formations, my hands steady despite the tremor in my heart. 10 years ago, I had run from my fate as a rare Omega wolf, one whose voice could soothe even the most savage alpha rage, one who would be claimed and used as a political pawn. 10 years of pretending to be a beta with damaged vocal cords, worthless in the hierarchical world of werewolf politics. "Did you hear?" whispered Mira, a young kitchen helper whose excitement made her practically vibrate beside me. "The Alpha King has never taken another mate because they say he's waiting for an Omega. They're so rare now, almost extinct." I nearly dropped the crystal goblet in my hand, catching it at the last moment. Mira didn't notice my reaction, too caught up in her gossip. "They say he can sense an Omega from miles away. That's why he's touring all the packs suddenly." Her eyes gleamed with romantic notions. "Imagine being claimed by Alaric Grey himself." I could imagine it all too well. That's why I'd been running my entire adult life. The afternoon slipped away in a flurry of preparations. By dusk, the great hall had transformed into a glittering showcase of power and wealth. Crystal chandeliers dripped with light, long tables groaned under silver platters, and the scent of roasted meats and spiced wine perfumed the air. I moved along the periphery, straightening tablecloths and polishing already spotless surfaces, trying to remain unnoticed. Hannah thrust a serving tray into my hands. "The delegations have arrived. You'll be serving the high table tonight." My blood froze. The high table meant proximity to alphas, to their heightened senses and scrutiny. I shook my head frantically, gesturing toward the kitchens. "Don't be ridiculous," Hannah scoffed. "You're the neatest server we have, and you won't embarrass us by chattering." "It's decided." I clutched my grandmother's pendant through my dress, feeling its familiar edges press into my palm. 10 years of safety threatened by a single night of bad luck. The great doors swung open and the procession began. First came our pack's alpha, Magnus, with his mate Victoria. Behind them streamed the visiting alpha pairs, each adorned in their pack's colors and insignias. I kept my eyes lowered, focusing on the polished floor as I took my position against the wall, tray balanced expertly in my trembling hands. A hush fell over the room. The air seemed to thicken, pressing against my skin with sudden weight. Even without looking, I knew who had entered, could feel the shift in energy like a physical touch. Alpha King Alaric Grey. Against my better judgment, I allowed myself a glance. He stood in the doorway, taller than any man had a right to be, his shoulders broad beneath a black formal jacket. His hair was the color of midnight, swept back from a face that seemed carved from stone, all sharp angles and uncompromising lines. But it was his eyes that caught and held me. Even from across the room, I could see they were the silver of a winter moon, cold and searching. Those eyes swept the room, assessing, judging, until suddenly they stopped. On me. I dropped my gaze immediately, but the damage was done. I felt his attention like a physical touch, a phantom finger tracing my spine. My hands tightened on the tray until my knuckles whitened. Don't notice me. Please don't notice me. The dinner proceeded with excruciating slowness. I moved mechanically between the kitchen and the high table, serving wine with downcast eyes, never lingering. Yet each time I approached, I felt those silver eyes tracking my movements. Once, when I leaned forward to place a platter of roasted venison before him, his hand brushed mine, a touch that seemed deliberate in its casualness. I flinched back, nearly spilling the dish. "Careful," he murmured, his voice deep and smooth as aged whiskey. It was the first time I'd heard him speak, and something inside me responded to it, a flutter beneath my ribs like a caged bird testing its wings. I gave a quick nod without meeting his gaze and retreated. Hours later, when the plates had been cleared and the formal toast made, the dancing began. I used the opportunity to slip away to the kitchens, desperate for a moment's respite from the weight of the Alpha King's attention. I leaned against the cool stone wall, closing my eyes and drawing deep breaths. The pendant felt hot against my skin, a warning I couldn't ignore. Why does a serving girl wear silver of such fine craftsmanship? My eyes flew open. Alaric Gray stood in the kitchen doorway, his massive frame blocking the exit. We were alone. Panic clawed up my throat. I shook my head and gestured vaguely to my throat, the universal sign I'd used for years to indicate my muteness. He cocked his head, studying me with unsettling intensity. "Magnus tells me you've been with this pack for 3 years. Before that, no one knows where you came from." I shrugged, keeping my expression neutral despite the hammering of my heart. He took a step closer, then another. I pressed back against the wall, but there was nowhere to run. When he stood before me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, he reached out. I flinched, but he merely touched the pendant at my throat. "This is a royal crest," he said softly, "from the northern packs that were decimated in the wars." I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to speak, to defend, to explain. His silver eyes narrowed, and he leaned closer, inhaling deeply near my neck. I trembled as his nose traced the line of my throat, a traditional wolf greeting that was far too intimate coming from an Alpha King to a supposed serving girl. "You hide your scent well," he murmured against my skin, "but not well enough." My eyes widened in horror. He knew. Somehow he knew. "I've been searching for you for a very long time," he continued, straightening to his full height. "The last Omega of the Northern Packs. The one who disappeared the night her family was slaughtered." Tears burned behind my eyes. A decade of secrets threatened to unravel with each word he spoke. "Tomorrow, we will speak," he commanded softly. "And you will tell me why the rightful heir to the Northern Territories pretends to be a mute servant rather than claiming her birthright." He stepped back, and something in his expression shifted. A softening around the eyes, a curious vulnerability that seemed at odds with his power. "Until then, little ghost." He turned and left as silently as he'd arrived, leaving me shaking against the wall. Sleep eluded me that night. I paced my tiny room in the servants' quarters, panic and possibility warring within me. He knew what I was. An Omega, yes, but also something more, the daughter of the slain Northern Alpha. A princess in hiding, presumed dead alongside her family. But he couldn't know everything. He couldn't know why I'd hidden my voice for so long, why I'd fled that blood-soaked night, with my grandmother's pendant clutched in my fist and her final warning echoing in my ears. They hunt Omegas for their voices, and they will hunt you most of all. As dawn broke over the mountains, I made my decision. By the time the Alpha King came looking for me, I would be gone, disappearing like the ghost he'd named me, leaving no trace for him to follow. I was halfway through packing my meager belongings when the screaming began. The screams tore through the early morning quiet. Panicked, desperate cries that sent ice through my veins. I abandoned my half-packed bag and rushed to my window, peering out at the courtyard below. Wolves in human form were running, some shifting mid-stride into their animal counterparts. Guards shouted orders, their voices tight with urgency. Through the chaos, I caught fragments of terrified conversation. Attacked at dawn. The border patrol. All dead, except... My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't a random attack. 10 years of running had taught me to recognize the signs. They had found me again. The silencers. Hunters who trafficked in Omega wolves. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. If I fled now, in the middle of chaos, I might escape both the hunters and the Alpha King. But as I turned toward my pack, a pounding at my door froze me in place. Open up. By order of the Alpha King, my fingers instinctively flew to my grandmother's pendant. 3 sharp knocks followed, then the splintering of wood as the door was forced open. 2 royal guards stood in the doorway, their expressions grim. "You're to come with us," the taller one said. "Now." No time for resistance. They flanked me as we moved swiftly through the servants' corridors, past wide-eyed staff and warriors preparing for battle, not toward the main gates as I'd expected, but deeper into the pack house, down staircases I'd never been permitted to use, until we reached a heavy iron door. One guard pressed his palm to it, murmuring words in the ancient tongue. The door swung open to reveal a war room. Maps covered the walls, marked with red pins and black lines. Around a massive oak table stood the Alpha leaders, their faces drawn with tension. At the head stood Alaric Gray, his powerful frame rigid as he bent over a map, silver eyes flashing as he issued commands. Those eyes found mine the moment I entered. Something passed across his face. Relief, perhaps, and something darker I couldn't name. "Leave us," he ordered. The room emptied immediately, the other Alphas filing out with curious glances in my direction. When the door closed behind the last of them, we were alone. "You were packing to run," he said. Not a question. I remained silent, clutching my pendant like a shield. "The same people who murdered your family have found you," he continued, circling the table toward me. "The silencers have been hunting Omegas for decades, but they've been particularly determined to find you." I took an involuntary step back, my shoulder blades pressing against the cold stone wall. "I need to know why." He stopped before me, close enough that I could see the flecks of darker gray in his silver irises. "I need to know what makes you so valuable that they would risk attacking a pack under my protection." The weight of 10 years of silence pressed upon me. I shook my head, gesturing to my throat in the familiar denial. His hand shot out, gently but firmly grasping my chin, tilting my face up to his. "No more pretending, little ghost. People are dying. My people, your people." Something broke inside me then. A dam holding back a decade of fear and loneliness. The first sound that escaped my lips was a ragged sob. "They want what's inside me," I whispered, my voice rusty from disuse. Speaking felt like swallowing glass, each word painfully formed after years of deliberate silence. The voice of an Omega is powerful, but mine is different. His eyes widened slightly at the sound of my voice, his thumb unconsciously stroking along my jawline. Different how? I closed my eyes, summoning courage from some hidden reserve. The northern packs had a prophecy about an Omega, born under a blood moon who would carry the voice of compulsion, not just to soothe Alphas, but to command them. His hand dropped from my face as though burned. That's impossible. No wolf can command an Alpha against their will. That's what my father believed. The memories rose unbidden, the night of crimson moonlight, the smell of pine and frost so similar to this place, the metallic tang of blood, until I accidentally commanded him to stop beating one of our pack members. He froze mid-strike, unable to move until I released him, understanding dawned in Alaric's eyes. "So you ran not just from being claimed. I ran because my father planned to use me as a weapon," I finished. "And when he couldn't control me, he arranged to sell me to the silencers, who collect Omegas with unique abilities. The night they came, my grandmother helped me escape. Everyone assumed I died in the attack." The room fell silent, save for the distant sounds of preparation for battle. Alaric paced the length of the chamber, his brow furrowed in thought. "Show me," he finally said, turning to face me. I shook my head. "I won't use it. Not ever again. People are dying out there," he said, his voice low and intense. "If what you say is true, you could end this without bloodshed. Or I could become exactly what my father wanted, a weapon to be wielded by whoever controls me. I stepped away from the wall, finding strength in finally speaking my truth. The moment I use my voice, I expose myself to everyone. The silencers will never stop hunting me. Alaric ran a hand through his dark hair, frustration evident in the tense line of his shoulders. Then why did you stay in wolf packs at all? Why not disappear among humans? The question caught me off guard. It was something I'd asked myself countless times over the years. Because I'm still a wolf, I answered softly. And because I hoped to find a place where I could belong without being used. Something shifted in his expression. A softening that made him look suddenly younger, more vulnerable. He closed the distance between us in 2 long strides. "What's your name?" he asked. "Your real name." I hesitated, understanding the power in such a simple question. Names had meaning among wolves. To share my true name was to offer trust I wasn't sure I could afford. "Lyra," I finally whispered. "Lyra Mooncrest." He repeated it, the syllables rolling off his tongue like a caress. "Lyra," then, surprising me completely, he took my hand in his much larger one, turning it palm up. With deliberate care, he pressed his lips to the center of my palm, an ancient gesture of sworn protection among royal wolves. "I swear on my crown and my life that I will not use you as a weapon," he said, his breath warm against my skin. "But I cannot stand by while my people die when you have the power to save them." His sincerity shook me. 10 years of running, of trusting no one, had not prepared me for the raw honesty in his silver eyes. Before I could respond, the door burst open. A blood-spattered warrior stumbled in, his eyes wild with battle fever. "They've breached the east wall," he gasped. "They have weapons, silver-tipped arrows. We've lost 12 already." Alaric straightened, the vulnerable man vanishing beneath the mantle of the Alpha King. "Evacuate the young and elderly through the tunnel system. All warriors to the east quadrant." The messenger nodded and disappeared. Alaric turned back to me, conflict clear in his expression. "Stay here," he commanded. "This room is warded. No one can enter without royal blood or permission." "You're going out there?" I asked, surprised by the surge of concern that flooded through me. A grim smile touched his lips. "I don't send my wolves where I won't go myself." He moved toward the door, but I caught his arm, the contact sending a jolt of awareness through my fingertips. "Wait," I said. "Take this." I slipped my grandmother's pendant over my head and pressed it into his palm. "It's been a protection charm for generations." He stared at the silver crescent, then carefully tucked it into his pocket. "I'll return it to you when this is over." With that, he was gone, leaving me alone in the fortified chamber with nothing but my troubled thoughts. Minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. The sounds of battle reached me even through the thick stone walls. Snarls, screams, the distinctive howls of wolves in pain. I paced the room like a caged animal, my newly reclaimed voice trapped in my throat. I could end this. I could stop the bloodshed with a few carefully spoken words, but at what cost? The decision was taken from my hands when the iron door swung open. I spun around, expecting Alaric, but instead found myself facing a stranger. A woman with hair the color of wheat and eyes like chips of green ice. Blood spattered her leather armor, and a cruel smile played across her lips. "The little Omega princess," she purred, at last. Fear froze me in place. "How did you get in here?" She held up a bloody hand, revealing a deep cut across her palm. "Royal blood opens royal doors." "Did your grandmother never tell you about your father's half-sister, the one he banished for challenging his rule?" "My aunt. The one my grandmother had warned me about in whispered stories. The wolf who had aligned herself with the silencers out of spite and vengeance." "You led them to my family," I whispered, the pieces finally clicking into place. "You helped them kill everyone I loved." "Not everyone," she countered, stepping closer. "I kept looking for you, for 10 long years." "Why?" I backed away, my eyes darting around the room for a weapon, an escape route, anything. "Because you're the key, dear niece." Her smile widened, the voice of compulsion, the power to command alphas. "Can you imagine what that's worth? Kingdoms, territories, alliances, everything can be ours. I won't help you, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. She laughed, the sound brittle as breaking ice. You don't have a choice. The Alpha King will die today. He's outnumbered and surrounded. And you'll come with me, willingly or not. As if to punctuate her words, a bone-chilling howl rose above the chaos outside, a wolf in mortal agony. The sound tore through me, and somehow, instinctively, I knew it was Alaric. In that moment, everything changed. The fear that had ruled me for a decade crystallized into something harder, sharper, determination. My aunt must have seen the shift in my eyes, because she lunged forward, a silver dagger appearing in her hand. But she had underestimated what 10 years of survival had taught me. I dodged, using her momentum against her, and slammed my elbow into her temple as she passed. She staggered but didn't fall, whirling back toward me with a snarl. "Little bitch!" she spat. "I don't need you unharmed, just alive." Another howl cut through the air, weaker this time. My heart constricted. I stopped running, stopped dodging. I planted my feet firmly on the stone floor and raised my chin. "You wanted my voice," I said, power thrumming through my veins as I embraced what I had denied for so long. "Let me give it to you." The air between us thickened, charged with an energy that made the hair on my arms stand on end. My aunt faltered, wariness flickering across her face as she sensed the change. "Sleep," I commanded, infusing the single word with all the power I had suppressed for a decade. Her eyes widened in shock, before her body crumpled to the floor like a marionette with cut strings. I didn't wait to see if the command would hold. I already knew it would. The voice of compulsion was not something that could be resisted, not even by an alpha with royal blood. I stepped over her unconscious form, and moved to the iron door, drawing a deep breath to steady myself. For 10 years, I had hidden. For 10 years, I had been silent. Now, I would be neither. The corridor outside was deserted, but the sounds of battle grew louder as I ascended the stairs toward the main level of the pack house. The metallic scent of blood grew stronger with each step, mingling with the acrid smell of smoke and fear. I followed the chaos, moving against the flow of wounded wolves being helped to safety. Nobody stopped me. In the confusion, I was just another figure moving through the halls, no longer invisible, but not yet recognized for what I truly was. I emerged into the main courtyard and froze at the scene before me. Bodies lay scattered across the once pristine stones, some in wolf form, others human. Pack members fought alongside royal guards against black-clad attackers wielding silver weapons. In the center of it all, a massive black wolf stood surrounded by 5 hunters, his silver eyes blazing with defiance despite the blood matting his fur. Alaric. Even in wolf form, I recognized him instantly. He was magnificent, larger than any wolf I had ever seen, with fur as dark as midnight and those unmistakable silver eyes. He favored his left side, where a deep wound leaked crimson onto the stones. Yet still he fought, teeth bared in a snarl as he lunged at the nearest attacker. I watched in horror as one of the hunters raised a crossbow loaded with a silver-tipped bolt. Time seemed to slow as they took aim at Alaric's heart. "Stop!" The command tore from my throat, louder than I had intended, charged with power that rippled visibly through the air like heat waves off sun-baked stone. Everyone in the courtyard froze. Hunters, pack members, royal guards, all rendered immobile by the force of my command. Only their eyes moved, widening in shock as they sought the source of the voice that held them captive. I stepped forward, trembling not with fear, but with the effort of controlling so many at once. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I moved toward Alaric, whose silver eyes tracked my approach with a mixture of awe and concern. "Hunters," I said, focusing my power specifically on the black-clad figures. "Drop your weapons." The clatter of metal against stone echoed through the courtyard as silver daggers, crossbows, and swords fell from suddenly nerveless fingers. "Kneel," I continued, my voice growing hoarse with the strain. The hunters dropped to their knees, expressions contorted with rage and disbelief at their bodies' betrayal of their wills. I turned to the pack members and royal guards next. "You are free to move, but do not harm the kneeling hunters unless they resist." The invisible bonds holding our allies released. causing several to stumble in surprise. Murmurs swept through their ranks as they stared at me with new eyes, recognition dawning as they connected the mute serving girl with the powerful Omega before them. Finally, I faced Alaric, who remained in wolf form, his silver eyes never leaving mine. "You can move now," I said softly, directing my words only to him. The great black wolf shuddered as my command released him. He limped toward me, leaving bloody paw prints on the stones, before shifting smoothly into his human form. Pack magic ensured he wasn't left naked. Black pants materialized as he transformed, though his chest remained bare, revealing the full extent of his injuries. A deep gash ran from his left shoulder down across his ribs, sluggishly leaking blood despite his enhanced healing. "Lyra," he said, my name a reverent whisper on his lips. Something in his voice made my heart stutter. Before I could respond, however, slow applause cut through the tense silence of the courtyard. "Magnificent," came a cold, cultured voice. "Everything I was promised and more." A man stepped forward from the shadows of the eastern archway. Unlike the other hunters, he wore no fighting leathers, but a tailored suit as dark as sin. His face might have been handsome, if not for the cruel twist of his mouth and the emptiness in his pale blue eyes. "Matthias," Alaric growled, instinctively moving to stand between me and the newcomer. "Alpha King," the man, Matthias, acknowledged with a mocking bow. "How fortunate that you've delivered exactly what I came for." I felt Alaric tense beside me. "You're the leader of the Silencers. Leader, founder, visionary." Matthias shrugged elegantly. "I prefer collector, personally. And your little Omega is the crowning jewel I've sought for a decade." "You'll never touch her," Alaric snarled, his voice deepening with the wolf rising beneath his skin. Matthias smiled, revealing teeth too sharp to be human. "I already have." He raised his hand, and I suddenly noticed the small dart gun concealed in his palm. Before anyone could react, he fired. I felt a sharp sting in my neck, my hand flying up to pull out a tiny feathered dart. "What?" I swayed as sudden dizziness washed over me. "A special blend," Matthias explained conversationally. "Designed specifically to neutralize Omega abilities. Temporary, of course. I wouldn't want to damage such valuable merchandise permanently." I tried to command him to stop, to freeze, to drop dead on the spot, but the words turned to ash in my mouth, my power slipping away like water through cupped hands. Alaric caught me as my knees buckled, lowering me gently to the ground. His face swam above mine, contorted with rage and fear. "What have you done to her?" "Simply leveled the playing field," Matthias replied. He snapped his fingers, and suddenly a dozen more hunters appeared from the shadows, these armed with strange-looking guns that hummed with an unnatural blue light. "Wolfsbane gas," Matthias explained, noting Alaric's wary glance. "One pull of the trigger, and every wolf in this courtyard will be paralyzed within seconds, except for me, of course." He smiled again. "I've developed an immunity." Alaric's arms tightened around me as he assessed our options. I could feel the tension in his body, the desperate calculation behind his silver eyes. He was a king, responsible for everyone here. He couldn't risk all their lives for one Omega, even if she was me. "Let her go," Matthias continued, "and I'll spare your pack. Fight, and I'll take her anyway, over your dead bodies." I clutched weakly at Alaric's arm, trying to communicate with my eyes what my voice no longer could. "Don't sacrifice everyone for me." The conflict in his expression was agonizing to witness. Then, something shifted in his eyes. A decision reached. "Take me instead," he said, his voice steady with deadly purpose. Matthias raised an eyebrow. "You? What use would I have for an Alpha King? Political leverage, ransom, territory negotiations." Alaric's grip on me never wavered. "I'm worth more than one Omega, no matter how rare." The hunter's pale eyes gleamed with sudden interest. "A tempting offer. But why not both of you?" "Because I'll come willingly," Alaric countered. "No resistance, no tricks. But she stays here, under the protection of my pack." I tried to protest, shaking my head weakly, but the drug had rendered me almost completely immobile. Tears of frustration burned my eyes as I realized what he was doing. Sacrificing himself for me, a woman he barely knew. Matthias appeared to consider the offer, tapping one finger against his chin thoughtfully. How remarkably noble, he said finally. But I'm afraid I must decline. The girl comes with me. His eyes hardened. Though I appreciate your willingness to cooperate, which is why I'll allow you to live, for now. He gestured, and 2 hunters stepped forward, weapons trained on Alaric. Release her, Matthias commanded, or watch your wolves die one by one. To demonstrate his point, he nodded to one of his men, who turned and fired at a young pack member standing at the edge of the courtyard. The wolf crumpled with a cry of agony, his body convulsing as the wolfsbane entered his system. Next will be your beta, Matthias said coolly, then your delta. I know the hierarchy of your pack, Alaric. I know exactly how to hurt you. I felt Alaric's chest rise and fall with a deep breath. Then with infinite gentleness, he lowered me to the ground, his hands lingering on my shoulders. I will find you, he whispered fiercely, his silver eyes boring into mine with an intensity that made my heart race despite the drug dulling my senses. No matter where he takes you, no matter how long it takes, I will find you. He pressed something into my palm, my grandmother's pendant, returned as promised. Then he stood, backing away with his hands raised in surrender. Matthias smiled in satisfaction. A wise choice, Alpha King. 2 hunters approached, roughly hauling me to my feet. My legs wouldn't support me, and I sagged between them, my head lolling forward as the drug continued to work through my system. Consider this a business transaction, Matthias said to Alaric. I acquire what I need, and in exchange, your pack survives. We'll be leaving now, and I suggest no one follows unless they wish to die quite painfully. As they began dragging me away, I managed to turn my head just enough to catch one last glimpse of Alaric. He stood tall despite his injuries, his face a mask of controlled fury, silver eyes promising vengeance. Around him, his pack members vibrated with the same barely contained rage, held back only by their alpha's silent command. The last thing I saw before they bundled me into a waiting black vehicle was Alaric shifting back into his massive wolf form, throwing his head back in a howl that contained all the anguish and promise I felt in my own heart. Then, darkness claimed me. I awoke to the gentle rocking motion of a vehicle in motion. My mouth felt stuffed with cotton, my limbs heavy and unresponsive. Blinking away the remnants of unconsciousness, I found myself lying on a narrow cot in what appeared to be the interior of a luxury transport van, modified with steel-reinforced walls and no windows. Ah, she rejoins us, came Matthias's smooth voice from somewhere to my right. I turned my head with effort to find him seated comfortably in a leather chair, watching me with the clinical interest of a scientist observing a rare specimen, which, I supposed, was exactly what I was to him. The effects should wear off completely within the hour, he informed me casually, though I wouldn't recommend attempting to use your voice. The collar around your neck is designed to deliver a rather unpleasant shock if it detects the particular vocal patterns associated with an Omega command. My hand flew to my throat, where I felt a slim metal band encircling my neck. Panic surged through me at the feeling of being leashed like an animal. Don't worry, Matthias continued, misreading my expression. It won't harm your valuable vocal cords permanently. It's merely a precaution until we reach the facility. Facility? I managed to croak, my voice weak and rough. He smiled, pleased that I'd spoken. My collection needs proper housing after all. You'll be joining the other special wolves I've acquired over the years. Though none quite as special as you, I must say. I closed my eyes, fighting back nausea that had nothing to do with the drugs in my system. How many? I whispered. Omegas? 17 currently, all with unique gifts, though none with your particular talent. He leaned forward, eyes gleaming with disturbing intensity. Do you know how rare you are? An Omega with the voice of compulsion appears perhaps once in 1,000 years. The last recorded case was during the Great Pack Wars, when an Omega Queen commanded 3 warring Alpha Kings to lay down their weapons and forge peace. Despite my situation, curiosity stirred within me. What happened to her? Matthias's smile turned cruel. She was murdered in her sleep by her own mate, who feared her power over him. That won't happen to you, of course. I have much more practical plans for your abilities. I won't help you, I said, forcing strength into my voice. I would rather die. So dramatic, he sighed. Death is not on the table, my dear. Cooperation, however, is negotiable in terms of comfort versus discomfort. He checked his watch. We'll arrive at the facility in approximately 6 hours. I suggest you use that time to adjust to your new reality. With that, he rose and moved toward the front of the vehicle. Leaving me alone with my thoughts and the weight of the collar around my throat, I curled onto my side, clutching my grandmother's pendant, which, miraculously, the hunters had not taken from me. Perhaps they hadn't recognized its significance, or perhaps they simply hadn't cared about a piece of seemingly decorative silver. As I traced the worn crescent moon with my fingertip, Alaric's promise echoed in my mind. I will find you. Against all reason, against 10 years of learned distrust and self-reliance, I found myself believing him. The facility resembled a modernized castle, all stone walls and Gothic arches retrofitted with security cameras and electronic locks. From the brief glimpse I caught as they escorted me from the transport, it stood isolated on a rocky outcropping overlooking a turbulent sea, a prison disguised as a fortress. "Welcome to the sanctuary," Matthias said, his hand firm on my upper arm as we passed through thick iron doors. "Your new home." The interior belied the medieval exterior with sleek clinical corridors lit by harsh fluorescent lights. Guards in black uniforms stood at attention as we passed, their expressions blank, their sense wrong. Not wolf, not human, but something unsettlingly in between. "Modified betas," Matthias explained, noticing my wary glance. "Enhanced strength and obedience, with none of the pesky pack loyalty or moral qualms that make natural wolves so difficult to control." We descended via elevator to subterranean levels, where the air grew cooler and carried the faint, underlying scent of other wolves, fear, resignation, and the distinctive sweet spice aroma of omegas. My heart ached at the realization that I was not alone in this nightmare, yet took no comfort in the shared suffering. The room they led me to was more luxurious than I had expected, a spacious chamber with actual furniture rather than a cell. A comfortable-looking bed, a small sitting area, even bookshelves stocked with volumes. But the absence of windows and the heavy electronic lock on the door dispelled any illusion that this was anything but a prison. "You'll be comfortable here," Matthias said. "More comfortable than most of my collection, in fact. Your cooperation could earn you additional privileges." I turned to face him, lifting my chin despite the inhibiting collar around my throat. "What exactly do you want from me?" His smile never reached his eyes. "Initially, information. You managed to hide for 10 years without using your voice. Quite impressive. I want to know how, where, and most importantly, who helped you. There may be other valuable specimens waiting to be collected." The thought of exposing anyone who had shown me kindness during my years in hiding made my stomach turn. "And after that? After that, we begin training. Your voice is a tool, one that needs refinement to reach its full potential." He gestured to a video screen embedded in the wall. "Tomorrow, we'll begin with simple exercises, small commands, target practice of sorts." The screen flickered to life, showing a sparse room where a young woman sat huddled in a corner, her blonde hair falling forward to hide her face. Another Omega, I realized with a jolt of recognition. I could sense it even through the electronic barrier. "Refuse to cooperate," Matthias continued, his tone conversational. "And there will be consequences, not for you, but for her. And the others." He nodded toward the screen. "I find that even the most stubborn wolves become remarkably compliant when their refusal causes pain to their own kind." Bile rose in my throat. 10 years of silence, of hiding my true nature, and still I had ended up exactly where I had feared, weaponized against my will. "I'll leave you to settle in," Matthias said, moving toward the door. "Dinner will arrive shortly. I suggest you rest. Tomorrow will be challenging." When the door sealed behind him, I sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching my grandmother's pendant like a lifeline. For the first time since my capture, I allowed tears to fall. Not for myself, but for the other Omegas trapped in this nightmare with me, and for the impossible choice I now faced. Cooperate and become the weapon my father had intended, or resist and cause suffering to innocents. Days blurred into weeks in the windowless confines of the sanctuary. Each morning began the same way, a bland meal delivered by silent guards, followed by training sessions where Matthias sought to hone my voice into a precision instrument of control. I gave him enough to believe I was cooperating. Small commands delivered to his modified guards, careful never to reveal the full extent of my abilities. Each small compliance bought safety for the other Omegas, while I watched and waited, learning the rhythms of the facility, memorizing guard rotations, studying the electronic systems that kept us caged. At night, alone in my room, I would hold my grandmother's pendant and whisper to it as though Alaric might somehow hear me across the unknown distance. "I'm still fighting," I would say. "Don't give up on me." It was during the 3rd week that everything changed. I was being escorted back to my room after a particularly draining session when alarms suddenly blared throughout the facility. Red emergency lights bathed the corridors in crimson as guards rushed past, weapons drawn. "What's happening?" I asked my escort, who gripped my arm more tightly. "Silence," he growled, dragging me forward with increased urgency. Instead of returning me to my room, he shoved me into a service elevator I hadn't seen used before. "Change of location," he muttered, punching in a code. Matthias's orders. As the elevator descended deeper than I had ever been in the facility, realization dawned. This was an evacuation. Someone had found the sanctuary. Someone was attacking it. Alaric. Hope surged through me so powerfully it was almost painful. 3 weeks might seem a short time for a rescue, but I had learned that time moved differently for an Alpha King with resources at his command. The elevator doors opened to reveal an underground parking garage where a black SUV idled, its engine running. My guard pushed me forward, but before we could reach the vehicle, a bone-chilling howl echoed through the concrete space. The guard froze, his hand going to his weapon. Too late. A massive shape hurtled from the shadows, a blur of midnight fur and flashing teeth. My escort didn't even have time to scream before the wolf was on him, powerful jaws closing around his throat. But it wasn't Alaric. The wolf that stood over my fallen guard was smaller, with fur the color of burnished gold. As I watched, it shifted into human form, revealing a woman with fierce amber eyes and a warrior's stance. "Princess Lyra?" she asked, her voice tinged with an accent I recognized from the Northern Territories. I nodded, speechless with shock. "I'm Seren, Royal Guard to the Alpha King," she said, quickly retrieving a key from the fallen guard and unlocking my collar. "We need to move now. The king is leading the main assault above, but Matthias is trying to escape with some of the Omegas." The collar fell away, and I gasped as the full return of my power flooded through me like a rush of fresh air after decades underground. My voice, no longer suppressed, hummed in my throat with potent energy. "Take me to him," I said, rubbing my neck where the collar had left angry red marks. "To Alaric?" Seren hesitated. "My orders are to get you to safety." "And mine are to help free the others," I countered. "No one knows this facility like I do now. And no one else has my ability to neutralize threats without bloodshed." She studied me for a moment, then nodded sharply. "Stay behind me." We made our way back up through emergency stairwells, avoiding the main corridors where sounds of battle echoed, growls, screams, the distinctive crack of specialized weapons. As we reached the main level, Seren shifted partially, her hands transforming into lethal claws, her eyes glowing amber in the dim emergency lighting. "The control room should be this way," I whispered, pointing down a corridor I had only glimpsed during my captivity. "If we can access it, I might be able to release the locks on the Omega quarters." We moved silently, encountering surprisingly little resistance. Most of the guards had been deployed to fight the invading wolves, leaving the inner sanctum vulnerable. The control room door was sealed with an electronic lock, but Seren made short work of it, ripping the panel from the wall and shorting the circuits with practiced efficiency. Inside, a single technician spun around in shock as we entered. "Sleep," I commanded before he could raise the alarm. He slumped forward onto his console, unconscious. I moved quickly to the bank of monitors displaying various areas of the facility. Most showed chaos, wolves in both human and animal form battling against Matthias's guards, but one screen captured my full attention. Alaric, in human form, stood in what appeared to be Matthias's office, facing the silencer leader across a massive desk. Even through the grainy security feed, I could see the lethal intent in Alaric's stance, the barely contained fury in his silver eyes. "Can we hear them?" I asked urgently. Seren tapped a few keys, and suddenly Matthias's smooth voice filled the control room. "Quite impressive. Breaking into my sanctuary," he was saying. "But ultimately futile. The Omega you seek is already gone. Transported to a secondary facility even your resources can't trace." Alaric's response was a low growl. "You're lying. I would know if she had left this place." Matthias raised an eyebrow. "Ah, yes. The infamous mate bond beginning to form. How inconvenient for you, to be tethered to a weapon you can never fully control." "She is not a weapon," Alaric snarled. "She is the rightful queen of the Northern Territories, and under my protection. She is an asset," Matthias countered coldly. "One I've invested too much in to surrender. Kill me if you wish, but my organization will continue hunting her long after I'm gone." I had heard enough. "Where's the quickest route to that office?" I asked Seren. She pointed to a layout displayed on another screen. "Through the east corridor, but it's heavily guarded." "Not for long," I interrupted, studying the security feeds. I located the camera showing the corridor in question, where 6 guards stood with weapons ready. Focusing my power, I leaned toward the microphone on the console. "Guards in east corridor," I commanded, my voice carrying through the facility's announcement system. "Drop your weapons and sleep." On the monitor, all 6 guards instantly collapsed. "Impressive," Seren murmured. "That's nothing," I replied grimly. "Let's go." We raced through now empty corridors, following the route I had memorized from the security system. As we approached Matthias's office, I could hear their voices more clearly, Alaric's deep growl contrasting with Matthias's controlled tone. "One last chance," Alaric was saying. "Surrender, release all Omegas, and dismantle your organization. Do this, and I may allow you to live." Matthias's laugh was cold. "You royals, always so predictable with your ultimatums. I have contingencies you can't begin to imagine." I paused outside the door, signaling Seren to wait. Through the crack, I could see Matthias reaching slowly toward his desk drawer, toward what I knew from my weeks of observation would be a concealed weapon. Alaric sensed the movement too late. As Matthias whipped out a silver-barreled gun, I burst through the door. "Freeze!" The command exploded from me with all the power I had been restraining for weeks. Matthias locked in place, the gun half raised, his eyes widening in shocked recognition. Alaric spun toward me, his silver eyes blazing with a complex mixture of emotions: relief, joy, fierce pride, and something deeper that made my heart race. "Lyra," he breathed. "I thought you might need some help," I said, my voice steadier than my pounding heart. His gaze swept over me, assessing for injuries, lingering on the raw marks around my neck. A muscle ticked in his jaw, and when he turned back to Matthias, his eyes had hardened to molten silver. "You hurt her," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Wait," I said, moving to stand beside him. "He doesn't deserve a quick death." I faced Matthias, whose frozen expression showed the first real fear I had ever seen from him. "You wanted my voice so badly, Matthias. Let me give you a proper demonstration." I drew a deep breath, gathering all my power, all my pain and anger from the weeks of captivity, from the years of running and hiding. "Matthias," I commanded, "you will release every Omega in your possession, here and at all other facilities. You will dismantle every operation, surrender every piece of research, and confess every crime you have committed against our kind. You will never again harm or pursue any wolf, particularly Omegas. And when you have done all this, you will turn yourself in to face Alpha Justice for your crimes." I felt the command take root in him, deeper and more binding than any I had issued before. His eyes glazed slightly as the compulsion wove through his mind, rearranging his priorities, his very will. When I released him from the freeze, he straightened mechanically. "I will comply," he said, his voice oddly flat. "All access codes and facility locations are in my private database." He gestured to his computer. Alaric looked at me with newfound respect. How long will the compulsion hold? Forever, I said quietly. I've never used this much power before, but I don't think he'll ever break free of it. Seren entered the room, eyeing Matthias warily. The other teams have secured the facility, my king. We've located 17 Omegas in the eastern wing. Get them out, Alaric ordered. And have Matthias escorted to the transport under heavy guard. I want that database secured immediately. As Seren led a docile Matthias away, Alaric turned to me, closing the distance between us in 2 long strides. You escaped on your own, he said, a hint of wonder in his voice. I shook my head. I had help. I reached out hesitantly, touching his arm. You came for me. I promised I would. His hand came up to cup my face, thumb gently tracing the curve of my cheekbone, though you hardly seemed to need rescuing. A smile tugged at my lips. Let's call it a collaborative effort. Something shifted in his expression then, the fierce warrior giving way to the man beneath. I searched for you for 10 years, you know. Long before I knew what you were, who you were. I've been having dreams of a blonde-haired wolf since I was 20, a wolf who never spoke but whose eyes told 1,000 stories. My breath caught. That's not possible. For true mates, many things are possible, he said softly. When I saw you that night in the Great Hall, I knew instantly. Not just that you were an Omega, not just that you were the lost northern princess, but that you were mine. The word resonated through me like a truth I had always known but never acknowledged. That's why you could sense I was still in the facility, I whispered. The mate bond. He nodded, his silver eyes never leaving mine. It's still forming, still new. But it's there. What happens now? I asked, suddenly aware of all the complications my reappearance would cause in the wolf world. A lost princess, an Omega with unprecedented power, the heir to territories long thought lost. That depends on you, Alaric said, his expression solemn. You have choices now, Lyra, real choices, not just survival decisions. His hand dropped from my face, though he remained close. You could reclaim your birthright in the north. You could disappear again, if that's what you truly want. I wouldn't stop you. And what about you? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What do you want? His eyes darkened. I want you by my side, as my mate, my queen, my equal, but only if that's what you want too. 10 years of silence, 10 years of hiding who I truly was. 10 years of loneliness. I reached up, touching his face as he had touched mine, feeling the slight roughness of stubble against my palm. For so long, I've defined myself by what I was running from, I said. Perhaps it's time to define myself by what I'm running toward. I stood on tiptoe, bringing my face closer to his. I choose you, Alaric. I choose to stop running. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after the longest night, brilliant and full of promise. He pulled me against him, one arm encircling my waist while his other hand tangled in my hair. Say it again, he murmured, his lips a breath away from mine. Say my name with that voice that could command armies but chooses to speak only truth. Alaric, I whispered, pouring all the newfound emotions swirling within me into those 3 syllables. My king, my mate, my choice. When his lips finally met mine, it felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. The kiss deepened, heat and tenderness mingling as the mate bond between us strengthened. Threads of silver and gold weaving our souls together in a tapestry neither time nor distance could unravel. We parted only when Seren cleared her throat from the doorway. Forgive the interruption, my king, my queen, she said, a slight smile playing at her lips. But the Omegas are asking to meet their rescuer. Alaric kept his arm around my waist as we turned to face her. Tell them their queen will see them shortly. Queen. The word should have terrified me, weighted as it was with responsibility and visibility, everything I had avoided for so long. Instead, I felt a profound sense of rightness, of stepping into a role I had been born for. As we walked from the room that had been my prison, leaving behind the silence that had been my cage, I remembered my grandmother's final words. Your voice is your power, little one. Guard it well. She had been right, but not in the way I had understood. My voice was indeed my power, not a weapon to be feared and hidden, but a gift to be used in defense of those who needed protection, in service of justice, in speaking truth to power. And as Alaric's hand tightened around mine, I realized I had found something else my grandmother had wished for me, something I had stopped believing in during my years of solitary running. A place to belong, someone to trust, a love worth breaking my silence for. "Ready?" Alaric asked, pausing before the doors that would lead us to the freed Omegas, to responsibilities and challenges and a future I could barely imagine. I touched the crescent moon pendant at my throat, now a symbol not just of what I had lost, but of what I had found. Then I raised my chin, straightened my shoulders, and stepped forward into the life I chose, no longer pretending, no longer hiding, no longer silent. "Ready," I said, my voice clear and strong. "Let's begin."